We take the people, we be optimistic, and we gonna win games, bro.
All right, welcome everybody back to another episode of the Big Douglas Show. I'm excited to welcome back to the podcast Sigmund Bloom, co-owner of footballguys.com. Sigmund, always a pleasure. How are you?
Good. I've absorbed the mini season of free agency. I think a lot of teams showed us where they think they are and where they hope to go, and things have calmed down enough. There's not a new headline every 30 minutes, so that we can think about it. And then next thing you know, it'll be the draft, and the next thing you know, it'll be training camp. And that's a beautiful thing about the NFL calendar. It pushes us forward like a nice breeze.
It just goes from one season to the next, as they say. I can't remember. The quarterbacks were moving hot and heavy in this thing. Which ones do you think have a bigger impact on fantasy this year? So we're looking at both Russell and
Justin Fields.
Fields. Yeah. Yep. And then of course Cousins, Mr. Show Me the Money down to Atlanta. Which ones do you think right away have the biggest impact?
Well, I mean, obviously Cousins is going to have the biggest impact, but that, even though that's an easy answer, that still conceals like the real fantasy analysis, which is going to be how big of an impact. And I think with players like Kyle Pitts and Drake London and Bijan Robinson, who are all significantly moving up. If you're following the best ball draft ADP, I think I saw even in some drafts, some high stakes drafts, Drake London's in the second round now, where he was in the fourth or fifth round before the signing. And I still think we're going to look back and we're going to say either we greatly overestimated the effect Kirk Cousins and Zach Robinson. It's a wholesale change to the offense. We either greatly overestimated or greatly underestimated it. I think even where these values have settled as people have absorbed the Kirk Cousins news, that's still a great unknown, and one where which side of the equation you take is going to be important to your fantasy strategy this year. I don't think the Steelers offense is going to change that much. I still think it's going to be hyper conservative, and it's still going to be a Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris backfield. And then, like you said, I mean, really the next conversation is more about the rookie quarterbacks. And we can look at CJ Stroud last year to remind us that, hey, rookie quarterbacks can actually also lift the value of players. So that is going to be a conversation we're having soon. And, with the Washington Commander stuff you have and this, Washington show in some respects, I think that's one of the keys to understanding what we should do with Washington. And I guess before we get there, we have to figure out who they're going to take.
Well, that's an interesting one. And I can't recall. It's been a while, it feels like, since the fan base has been so divided on this one. And it's funny because Sigmund, it's not just divided, but it's like those that like Jaden for some reason just hate May.
Right.
And vice versa. Like there is not this in between where it's like, yeah, I hear what you're saying with this prospect. And oh yes, I hear what you're saying with this prospect. And because everything is brand new in Washington, it's hard to get a bead on what it is that maybe they want to do, right? I mean, first time for the GM, the head coach is his first time here in Washington, not his first time as a head coach. And then you got Cliff back in the offensive coordinator role where he's saying, listen, it's not really an air raid. It's something different. You bring in Anthony Lynn, which I don't think Sigmund is being talked enough about as far as the offense goes. One of the big problems with Kingsbury was getting from one play to the next, being able to get in some of that play action where it actually makes sense, matching. He didn't do that very well. Anthony Lynn, obviously being with Shanahan the last couple of years, should have been under the tutelage of somebody that does it the best. Does one quarterback, it feels like it'll be one of those two. Do you think one, I'm guessing Daniels has more significant upside because of the running?
Well, for fantasy, Daniels absolutely does.
Yes.
But, we have Justin Fields as a little bit of a cautionary example that what's good for fantasy may not last if the passing is not there to keep them in the job. And I think with Jaden Daniels. And durability is a question. I think one of the things that comes up in every scouting report of Jaden Daniels, I think was Mina Kimes and Doug Farrar both said Wile E. Coyote, the way that he throws his body around out there. That's something he's going to have to learn really quickly. I think another potential concern is that you're going to have 2 first-round wide receivers he was throwing to. So how much does that maybe especially when a player had this incremental gain throughout his career and then broke out once he had 2 first-round receivers, for some reason I'm thinking about Zach Mettenberger and how he couldn't look good even with Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham at LSU. And then Drake May, it's a different kind of question. It's a different kind of optical illusion where you have, I think 2022 Drake May, if people just watch 2022, Washington fans would be thrilled. Every Washington fan would be thrilled at that quarterback.
That's right.
This year, you saw maybe more duress for him or less ideal conditions, but I think that's the most valuable tape for a college quarterback, because what they're going to face in the NFL is going to be so much more difficult. This is why Michael Penix's stock plummeted after the Michigan game, because that was the closest simulation of an NFL defense he was going to see. And then the NFL said, oh, okay, well, maybe he's not quite the quarterback.
He needed a CJ Stroud game there.
He did, and he didn't put it up there. Now, he's got a little bit of a rebound, too, and I think he might be more ready to impact his team immediately than May or Daniel. So it's going to be interesting to see who comes up for him. But I think that May is probably the safer prospect, but Daniels is the one who has that athleticism, the ability to tilt the field so that the defense is not really able to account for everything. And either way, it's going to be a really fascinating decision, and one that's going to affect all the decisions that come after.
That's right. The draft really starts there at 2. It doesn't sound like they're willing to trade down from 2 or 3. And it's interesting because I've heard plenty of people say, well, the Patriots have so many needs, they should trade down and accumulate picks. And I always say, if you could say that for number 3, then you certainly could say that for number 2.
Yeah.
Because both of the teams, to me, look fairly similar roster-wise.
Yep.
They're in the early stages. To you, are either of these 2 quarterbacks we're talking about surefire enough that you wouldn't move off the spot?
No. But you have to get that other offer. You have to have the dance partner. And I think that if we're looking at, Doug, what are they throwing out now for the estimated terms of Minnesota moving up to number 4? 3 first-round picks and, right? It's similar to the Trey Lance trade. That's for 4. Now, if you get another option and you move up to 3, now we're adding more to that. And if you're moving up to 2, now we're adding more to that. And I guess the other side of the equation, which we don't have access to, is what did the scouting departments believe about these quarterbacks after they got done working them up? So that's going to affect the level of the deal they need to get. But I do think you're right to say that maybe we're going to see more in the NFL, like the NBA, like MLB, where maybe some teams will be more patient. Maybe some teams will be laying the groundwork to compete 3 years from now instead of next year or this year. In Washington's case, and I think we can look at the 2 teams and how they handle the succession plans, where New England, I think, is trying to, there's some continuity, right? Jared Mayo is a Patriots company guy through and through. And it's going to be updated. It's like Patriots 2.0. With Dan Quinn, I would guess you're wanting more immediate results. And that's the part where you wonder about the development of the quarterback. You wonder about the choice of the quarterback. So I think that for that reason, Washington would be less likely to trade down, because I just don't know there's going to be as much patience there in the pace of the rebuild.
And then we get to this conversation about who's more ready to play right away. I keep hearing Drake needs to sit. I'm not sure that I understand that. And it doesn't matter, because guys don't get to sit, and you certainly don't get to sit number 2, right? So whether or not you think he needs to sit, that's not the conversation, because whoever you pick at 2 is going to start. I mean, Anthony Richardson started last year, right? And he had minimal college production. So that's just how it works. And to your point, it's brutal because nobody's getting time to relax and build these things. Maybe Mayo, with his history there, to your point, in New England, gets the longest leash because that's just kind of what they do there.
Yeah.
Everybody else is for, whatever the GM signs 4 or 5 years. I mean, if it doesn't work, then everybody's out together. Not fair, but that seems to be the reality of where we're at here with the sport, which is
Yeah.
crazy too, Sigmund, because we're not even really playing the same game. I mean,
Yeah.
think about what they're doing in college football is not the NFL. They're just not. Today's change of the rules signifies that even more. So you're imagining like this notion that a quarterback's coming in pro ready seems almost ludicrous to say.
Yeah. I think that Jordan Love also looms as an
Mhm.
example here. Is Jordan Love this quarterback if he has to play in his rookie year, if he has to play even maybe in his second
That's
year,
right.
if he's handed the job, and not just, I shouldn't say handed the job, if he wins the opportunity to have the job and then all the pressure that comes with that. So I thought it was really fascinating that they said that while Jordan Love was struggling, one of the things that kept him on track was that his teammates all believed in him and his teammates were all behind him. But would they have had that same kind of trust if he hadn't been in the locker room for 3 years with them and put in the
Mhm.
work and done everything? So I do think that, and that's where we bring in, Michael Penix and the idea of a quarterback who's not drafted at the top of the first round, that doesn't have that much pressure and can be developed with some more patience. But to your original point about the way that, the turnover, what is it this year, Doug? How many teams have new offensive coordinators? Like about half the
Yes,
league.
have
It's
to leave.
eh, how can we expect anything to be built when things are changing that quickly? Do we ever even get an honest opportunity to see what these players can do if they're in a program that allows them to actually build instead of having to completely tear everything down and start over? And that's why you say, like, New England, the Steelers obviously are a great example of continuity, for better or for worse. At least you get a chance to see the actual results.
Yes, there's no doubt about that. Who gets more fantasy points this year,
Okay.
Russell Wilson or Justin Fields? This
I
one's
want to say
interesting.
Russell Wilson. Well, it's interesting because the latest from the owners' meetings now is Mike Tomlin he's not saying it's Russell Wilson's job. He's saying he's got the pole position, but they are going to encourage competition, right? Um, and I think that if the Steelers, I'm a Western Pennsylvania born and bred Steelers fan, so I'm neurotic about the Steelers, and I might not be the best person to ask about this, but I feel like the Steelers are a conservative organization in just about every way, in the way they handle decisions, the way they handle player development, the way they handle coaching decisions. Hopefully, some of the way things went this offseason signifies that they're more open to a different way of looking at things. But I think that a don't lose the game quarterback like Russell Wilson really fits what they want. And I think that it actually makes more sense with the way they have the team built right now to have Russell Wilson in there and hope that if there is a fourth quarter drive necessary, he can still find some of that old magic. And kind of like what Peyton Manning was doing with the last Super Bowl he won with Denver, than a more dynamic quarterback like Justin Fields, where he can make more things happen, but he can also make more bad things happen. And maybe he needs to be reprogrammed a little bit from the situation he was in Chicago, where he was just thrown to the wolves, basically, to where he's at as more of a game manager in Pittsburgh. So I think it is going to be Russell Wilson, but that might be my pessimism about the Steelers being a organization that is averse to risk taking, because I think Fields is the risk reward option and Wilson's the safe option.
It was interesting when you mentioned Love earlier and how much he relied on the teammates, standing up for him. I thought it was interesting. They did the same thing for Justin Fields in Chicago, right? Like,
Yes.
really wanted him to stay there. That was never going to happen. But you don't usually outwardly hear that kind of support for a guy. Back to the Pittsburgh thing.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm more curious whether they'll opt to use him in the red zone. We talk about,
They will.
running backs that steal from each other,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I wonder if Fields gets a lot of running yards and a lot of touchdowns just simply in that money zone.
Yeah, I think, and real quickly to your point about Justin Fields in Chicago, and I think this applies to the Steelers situation, and it's something we don't talk about enough. Absolutely, Justin Fields had that locker room. He was the leader of that team. They were invested in him. He was invested in the team, and probably part of the reason that they had to trade Justin Fields before they drafted Caleb Williams is now that has to be Caleb Williams' locker room. And if Justin Fields is still there, then you create the potential for a rift or discord. And likewise, Russell Wilson is not exactly known as a guy that wins over his teammates. There's lots of stories going back to even when things were good in Seattle about how he was received in the locker room. And again, Justin Fields is a guy who wins people over. That's going to be a tension there. But I had Matt Williamson on my show last week, and he's Pittsburgh. He's a fellow Yinzer, and he's really close to the team too. And he said the way he put it, which I thought was great, was Justin's going to get his jersey dirty every week. Every week he's going to be out there doing some things. And I think that's, again, the Steelers maybe being a little more forward-looking, getting some value out of that signing. Absolutely, there should be Justin Fields packages, if only to make the defense have to spend valuable time preparing for them every week.
After the hip drop notice today, I think I saw Brett Coleman say something to the effect of, watch lots of passes to tight ends in the screen now. You, as a Pittsburgh guy, have one of my favorite tight ends from Georgia. Will this spell good news for the big fellow this year?
I hope so. Darnell Washington's a really interesting player because there aren't many like him.
That's right.
And I think Matt Waldman in his RSP last year compared him to a broadsword. He might not be strong enough to swing a broadsword, but if you can swing it, you're going to do a lot of damage with it. It's not a scalpel, not a stiletto. And I think that with Arthur Smith, it just makes sense that you're going to see more 2 tight end sets, more 3 tight end. They still like Connor Hayward a lot too. And of course, Pat Freiermuth is there. So I think you're going to see more 2 and 3 tight end sets. I think this also goes hand in hand with, you have George Pickens and, we'll see. We'll see who they draft. We'll see if there's another move coming at wide receiver other than Quez Watkins. So there's your hot news flash from the morning. I think that all makes a lot of sense. And I think the exciting idea of a vertical tight end, a tight end with speed, a tight end that's tough to bring down in the open field. I do think that the smart teams are going to be looking at what kinds of plays do smaller defensive backs feel the need to do this style of tackle where they might be hesitant when it's time to bring that guy down. And I do hope we see a lot more of Darnell Washington this year.
You guys are starting to collect Bulldogs up there. If you draft Mims this year, you guys will have the whole thing. No, those are some of my favorite Bulldogs too. What do you think the situation will look like in Washington now that they've kind of got this 2-back set with Robinson and Eckler? It's an interesting duo.
Yeah, I think that Brian Robinson's been better than they expected, and of course,
definitely. The injury slowed obviously now, but he's back to full health and rocking and rolling.
And he's a player that, and always with the asterisk of a new regime. So what does the new regime think? I don't think it reflects poorly on him that they went out and got Austin Eckler. When you look at the terms of the Austin Eckler contract, that's a 1A kind of running back contract. That's not a starting running back contract. And I always like to bring up, Doug, when we talk about Brian Robinson, is remember, he got shot right before the season in his rookie year, and he still was a reasonably effective player in his rookie year. And then we saw a player who was blossoming, a player who was showing more skills in the passing game than he was advertised to have, and a player that on a not great team was still in our fantasy circles pretty productive. And there's the classic, I took the wrong B Robinson. I took Brian Robinson instead of Bijan Robinson. Actually, for a while that looked like the better move in your draft. So I don't think you're going to see Brian Robinson's role change that much. And hopefully what they can do with Austin Eckler is, keep him healthy and then use him more on wheel routes, get him detached from the formation, create mismatches. And that's where we're going to see with Cliff Kingsbury and Arthur Smith, this conversation. I remember Cam Cameron, who was just an absolute disaster as the head coach in Miami, but still was a good offensive coordinator when he took his next job. I think it was in Baltimore. So I do think that hopefully we can see that Cliff, where all that's on his plate is offense.
That's right.
And as you mentioned with Anthony Lynn too, and I could wax rhapsodic about the Lions and what they've done. And certainly, if you are a Washington fan, if you are a New England fan, if you are a fan of some of these long-suffering teams, what has happened in Detroit should give you some hope that things can turn around pretty quickly if you have organizational alignment and you have a plan. And Anthony Lynn was one of the coaches that Dan Campbell brought in and pretty quickly figured out that Ben Johnson was really the person who should be the offensive coordinator. But again, you're segmenting Anthony Lynn's job. Now, he's not an offensive coordinator. He's a counterpart to Cliff Kingsbury. So I do think that hopefully you'll see these guys deployed in a way that maximizes their value. And Washington, their offense, if they were able to do what they did last year with Sam Howell, then I would think that, I don't know how long that we'll see the rookie. We'll have to wait to see the rookie start, but it should be an improved offense. And both of those players could easily outperform what they cost in fantasy drafts.
Yeah, it's odd because Marcus Mariota doesn't they're bridge guys out there, right? That you plan on. And at this point, Mariota doesn't seem like one of those guys. Also, Brian Johnson's over from the Eagles, who when Dak was not Dak, but Jalen was having some of his better years. That's who was the quarterback coach. So yeah, it's interesting the hybrid group they've kind of put together there in Washington, and it'll be interesting to see kind of what the offense looks like, because I'm not really sure that we have a good grasp on what that will be at this point. Wanted to go back quickly to Kirk Cousins down in Atlanta. The other thing that I see in my mind with this group is the bump that Pitts ought to get. Yeah. I just see Cousins throwing to all these different tight ends. I think all the way back to Jordan Reed in Washington and Vernon Davis. Should be a big bump for Pitts. I think maybe the year we've all been waiting for.
Oh yeah, and he also probably wasn't healthy for at least 1+ years of the time we were watching him. That's one of those hidden stories in the NFL that at this time of year you hear these things revealed. Chase Young was playing through a neck issue that had to be surgically repaired. It gives you a different context for how they performed. And absolutely, Kyle Pitts, with Kyle Pitts and Drake London, what we're going to find out pretty quickly is just how much was the offense holding them back, how much was the design of the offense, the play calls, and most importantly, just the lack of catchable balls. And Kirk Cousins is going to bring that around right away. And Kyle Pitts, I think he was falling. I don't know where he's at now, but he was falling to the 8th or 9th round. And even before they made this move for Cousins, I thought, well, geez, at some point you still say well, that's attractive enough. Now he's back up in the 7th round, 6th, 7th round, which is cheap, still cheaper than he was last year. So I'm in because of what Kirk Cousins can do, because we saw Kirk Cousins last year pretty quickly support Addison and Jefferson and Hawkinson all at pretty high values going into the season. I think you had like a top 2 pick, a 4th round tight end, a 6th round wide receiver, and they were all doing just fine with Kirk Cousins. And most importantly, the Zach Robinson offense, McVay, Kyle Shanahan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it should be a pretty seamless transition for him and for this offense.
Were you surprised? I was surprised after Kirk got the first fully guaranteed at quarterback. I don't know why I assumed that would just be a thing. Every quarterback would then be requiring guaranteed contract. Are you surprised that didn't happen? I mean, I felt like a no-brainer, and it just didn't happen.
From a what's fair standpoint, I'm surprised, but from the owners are going to look after their interest standpoint, because it was really the Deshaun Watson deal, I think, that made the other 31 owners say, we're not going to let this happen. We're just not going to let this happen. I think even, the Lamar Jackson situation is fascinating to look back on, because there are some people that are saying, well, Lamar Jackson was never going to get traded, and what would have even been the point of signing him to an offer sheet and having that money tied up at any time whenever you knew that Baltimore was just going to match it and you're doing their work for them. But I do think that there were plenty of ways that a contract could have been structured to make it so that Baltimore could match it. We've seen poison pill deals in the NFL in the past, and I think even that was one where the owners are absolutely policing how salaries grow, the rate that they grow, the structure of contracts. I think if you look over at baseball, there's some interesting stuff going on with some free agents. Still, like some of the best free agents are still not signed, and the season's about to start. And one of the free agents said something to the effect of that the league has a database that has an algorithm that sets the value of players, and they all have the same login and password. And I think with respect to the fully guaranteed contract for quarterbacks, yeah, the login and password said we're not going to do this. We're not going to give fully guaranteed contracts to quarterbacks, no matter how good they are.
Couple more things before we get you out of here. What do you think what do you think the top of the rookie drafts will look like this year in fantasy?
Superflex is going to be where it's interesting. Superflex rookie drafts, you're going to have the 4 quarterbacks. I don't think JJ McCarthy is going to fall past 11 or 12 anyway. So he's still going to be a premium pick. You have the big 3 wide receivers. And I guess the question is your league a tight end premium league or not? But you could really see.
Do you like the tight end premium leagues?
I do. Oh, come on.
More
Anything
points,
that makes
more
fantasy football more interesting. It adds more layers of strategy to your draft, to your lineup setting, your flex choices. And let's give those guys some love because they take a lot of punishment. Obviously, the jobs that they're asked to do on the field. So I love that. So, but my point is, there's one rookie draft where I have the 3rd pick, and I'm looking at, hey, maybe I might want to trade down to the 6th or 7th pick simply because the drop off is not going to be as significant depending on what you think of the quarterbacks, depending on what you think of those big 3 receivers. And then you're going to get to a vast plateau. So, and again, if we're talking about a typical league with 1 quarterback, now we're talking about maybe the top 4 or 5. And Caleb Williams could be a real difference maker. Jaden Daniels could be a real difference maker too. There's more risk there. The other thing that's going to be interesting to play in your rookie drafts is the value of pick 10, 11, 12, and the value of pick 20 or 25. It's not going to be that different because of the wide receiver group and because of the running back group. And I think with both of those cases, you might be better off looking at landing spot instead of draft capital or the order they go off the board when you put your board together. But for people that like to play the draft, you like to trade down, you like to see where the value plateaus and then where the value drops off in rookie drafts, this is going to be a really exciting opportunity to make deals and not really lose a lot of value and collect extra picks.
And what do you think the first 5 or 6 picks in redraft look like?
I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. should be number 1. He should, well, again, a little bit of a cliffhanger. I mean, it sounds to me like Marvin Harrison Jr. will still be the first wide receiver off the board. And it makes sense to me that he would be the first wide receiver off the board in rookie drafts. And then there's Malik Neighbors. It seems like now there's some still saying, hey, Malik Neighbors, depending on what you're looking for, some organizations might have Neighbors ahead of Harrison. And that sets up a situation where, well, if Neighbors goes ahead of Harrison, should he go ahead of Harrison in rookie drafts? And we can start talking, Doug, we can start talking about hypothetical situations like how much does it make you not want Malik Neighbors if he's a Giant, right? Versus if he's a Cardinal, and so on. So I think that, and then there's Rome Odunze, who in most drafts would easily be the number 1 wide receiver, and maybe his value. And again, this is where, hey, if you can trade down to 3 and get him and get another 1st round pick next year because somebody wants Marvin Harrison that badly, that's probably a pretty good move. And if he's falling down, say, to Chicago, and he's going to get to grow with Caleb Williams, there's an argument that he should be the number 1 because these guys are close enough that the quarterback and the offense they play in the long run could determine who's the most valuable.
Is McCaffrey still the first pick in the draft, or are there too many weapons in San Francisco to do that?
Oh, he's got to be the first pick in the draft.
He's got to be, right?
Yeah, and I think this is one of the situations. The wheels fall off. But we saw how much of an advantage he gave us last year. If you take Kyron Williams out, the drop off is like the drop off from Travis Kelce to the tight ends in years past.
Right.
And he's still scoring like a premium player, half PPR. He's scoring like a premium player. So I think you have that alignment now. And we saw that Elijah Mitchell is really just a backup. I think it's got to be Christian McCaffrey, if only because I don't know it's clear which wide receiver you would take. A lot of people would say CeeDee Lamb, but there's still some more chips to fall. So I think that makes it pretty easy for you when you're picking number one to take McCaffrey.
And then is Travis Kelce still the first tight end off the board?
Probably not. Not in the drafts that I've
seen.
Not
this year. It's coming soon.
Right. Well, and people are looking at their trajectories. So I think you're seeing Sam Laporta pretty unanimously as the number one tight end off the board right now in the underdog drafts. He's going 32nd, and Kelsey's not going until 43rd. So that on average, and that is a very significant difference. And actually, Kelsey is trending down a little bit, and Laporta is too, not quite as much, but I think the answer is neither, right? I can make a case for Kelsey that they were just load managing him, right? They were just saving him for the playoffs. He's still Travis Kelce. He's still that good. But my reply to that would be, well, they're going to do it again. Why won't they just do it again? And they're probably going to draft a wide receiver, and they have Marquise Brown, who's a more attractive target than Marquez Valdez-Scantling. So I think you're going to see Kelce take a little more of a step back. That being said, we had a player who was a mid-first round value last year in drafts, and he wasn't worth that. He still was a top 2 tight end when the dust settled. Even wasn't great in the fantasy playoffs, and now he's available at a 3-round discount. So that's an interesting choice. I think Stephon Diggs is fascinating too, because Stephon Diggs is a guy that is where the fantasy community, the collective intelligence of the fantasy community is kind of splitting the difference, right? Like, are we going to get declining Travis Kelce or the Travis Kelce we saw in the playoffs? Let's split the difference. And it makes the choices really interesting when you're drafting. And I do think that, though, at tight end, early indications, we already talked about Kyle Pitts. So if I can get Kyle Pitts 2 or 3 rounds later, yeah, I'm going to be on that. David Njoku, Jake Ferguson, these guys are going in the 8th round. Evan Ingram is going in the 7th round. George Kittle's going in the 6th round. Dalton Kincaid in the 6th round. Mark Andrews is going in the 5th round. Trey McBride's going in the 5th round. I think all of those are more attractive than paying up for one of the top 2 tight ends.
I had not thought about it like that, but you're right. Load management is the perfect description for what happened with Kelce last year and a lot of people's fantasy teams. So, all right, we get out of here each time with your prediction for who the Commanders will take it to.
Yeah, I just think we've heard so much buzz about Daniels. I feel like this is like when I'm sorry to even bring this up, Doug. Sorry to bring this up, but I feel like this is when Zach Wilson ended up going number 2 to the Jets, where there was a point in the draft cycle where the mock draft started to line up, the buzz started to line up, the betting market started to line up, and the betting market's probably the least reliable of those 3 things, by the way. But everything started to line up before people even asked the question, who should the Jets take number 2? It was just a foregone conclusion that they were going to take Zach Wilson. And I don't know if this is one of those things where, people are talking more than they should be, because this isn't something that should be known out there. I think there's a competitive advantage for Washington to keep their plans close, at least at this point in the cycle. But I think it's going to be Daniels. I think that the athleticism, the big playability as a runner is something that's just too tantalizing. And I think with Drake May, you have that eye of the beholder aspect where you're looking at 2022, you're looking at 2023. It may well be that the Patriots get the better quarterback, but the Commanders will get the more exciting quarterback.
Where do you stand on that breakout age? It's a number people, it's a word people like to throw out, and that's kind of like the big, particularly with this cycle, right? Because that's the difference between the two. Right. Where do you stand? Do you buy into that?
I think it's really, really short-sighted to throw all players in a bucket as if they're all similar. Yeah. And you really have to look at these things on a case-by-case basis. And I do think that if we're talking about wide receivers and running backs, breakout age makes a little more sense to me because those are such physical positions. Your physical tools matter so much more at those positions. And at quarterback, I think it's more of a spiritual, mental, emotional position than a physical position. And it might be the coaches you had, it might be the program you were in. There's reasons that a quarterback might not have broken out until later in their college career the way Daniels is. So I'm not looking at that as a sign, as a high level filter for quarterbacks. And I think that we can look back at how the league has been drafting first round quarterbacks over the last 3 years, and what do they even know? And there is no skeleton key because of the bust rate on these quarterbacks right now. And I think that comes again back to how the organizations develop them, and hopefully whichever quarterback, Doug, I like to ask people. I started asking this question mid-season last year. What if Bryce Young had gone to Houston and CJ Stroud had gone to Carolina?
Yeah.
How much different would it have looked? And it's a kind of a Rorschach inkblot question about like, well, what's more important, the inherent qualities of the player or the organization that they're in? And I think that there's no way to answer that question without saying they're both important. So I think that's really low on the list of things you would use to decide which quarterback to take.
I think that's a great point. What do you guys got coming up on the podcast this week?
Cecil's at the owners' meetings, so we'll get some talk from little birdies flying around there. I've got Matt Harmon on the couch this week, which is always fun. My nephew, he just released his reception perception profiles of the top 3 receivers. It's an exciting time there. And Cecil and I will be coming live from the owners' meetings, and Dave and Alfredo will continue to keep everyone updated on the draft and dynasty. There's no off season for us because we love it so much, because we love hanging out with everybody in the community.
No doubt about it. Well, buddy, you're the best, Sigmund. I always appreciate when you come on, and until next time, have a good one.
I look forward to it.
All right.